Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. This is our 10th anniversary, meaning we've been doing this in one form or another for 10 years. I hope you all are enjoying it. We're having a good time. We've been visiting with Peter and Deborah, who are going to be with us next week, and they've been here before. So anyway, let's get into the show a little bit, see if I can do this right. First thing I've got to do is share. I've been a long time since I've been hosting. I used to host all the time. I used to know everything about hosting, but oh man, it got tough after a while, and I broke it up. But now let me see if I can do this right. I go over to here, press that.
You want to have them talk about next week's show real quick before you get into the YouTube statistics and stuff?
What was that, Molly?
Never mind.
We're going to have Deborah and Peter give a
I thought you were starting your PowerPoint. Go ahead. You're good.
Hi. Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. We're facing some kind of rebellion. I don't know what is actually happening. Today we're going to be talking about the anniversary. Tell you a little bit about why we do what we do, how we do what we do, what we need to do it all right, and things like that. After that, Molly's going to come in and, she's a very busy person, and so she likes to sleep while she's taking pictures, and she's going to show us how to do that with Nina. And then I am going to talk about dithering for a while because it's an essential skill. It's one of the things we found on cloudy nights that people are always asking questions about, and we try to make our programs up about that. Deborah and Peter are going to be here next week. We'll be back to them in a minute or two. We've had to move the July 14th show around because there ain't going to be nobody here that knows how to operate the whole system during that week. They're all for some reason or another taken off to someplace. And then we've got a few more, but then we start having these opens, and these opens are not good. And we need you to come out and help us with the opens because we need some volunteers. If you can do some things yourself, if you feel you can put on a PowerPoint presentation, just get a hold of us. You'll find out more about that in just a bit or two. And hopefully you're all over here. Hey, Tarek is back, and I can see you over there. I'll be saying some things that are probably wrong today. So be over here and correct me over here in chat. I'm going to be talking about Nina, and I don't know as much about Nina as I should. Here's a good place to talk about it. Say hi to everybody. We know you do that anyway. So let's get to, Deborah and Peter. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If I can figure out how to do that. Stop sharing. Deborah, Peter, tell us, why should people come next week to watch you?
Well, I'm going to be extolling the virtues of this magnificent piece of Yankee technology from the 1960s. And the high quality instrument that it is, and how I think they need to get a little more respect in the amateur astronomical world as a truly fine instrument. And there's all kinds of attributes of this instrument that are worth noting, and the kind of performance it can deliver is amazing. And so I'll be going on about that and a few other things.
Okay, and Deborah will be here with us too, so we're gonna have a good time next week. But how about looking back over the last 10 years and for this particular year and see how we've done? Now, I do hope I get all of this right. I am going to share my screen again, and I'm going to share my entire screen. I want to share this screen. Share. Then I'm back over here. I'm going to come over here and start the show. Oops. There we go. That's where we should have been. It's anniversary time on the Astro Imaging channel. It's good to now and then review one's life, to celebrate one's achievements, one's victories, and to think about one's shortfalls. And every June on TAIC, we have a few minutes together to tell you about how the Astro Imaging channel is doing. It makes us feel good for what we have accomplished. It challenges us to keep going forward for what we have not yet accomplished. It helps us make you part of the team, because you need to know that, we work through these things. Our extended members of TAIC family, our supporters, our friends, our fans, we hope to let you know how important you are to the whole operation. We feel in many ways, the bunch of us, Gowrie, Tim, who can't be with us today, Eric, Patrick, Wanda, Molly, Tolga, and I, and of course, all of you out there, are part of our large social contract, a big kind of club or family that are united in our love for the latest and greatest in astroimaging. And by the way, I got to mention this, okay, so I'm not in trouble. It's also Judy and my's 49th anniversary today. On June 23rd, 1975, we had our first date. My cousin Betty, my favorite cousin Betty, I might add, but don't let the other ones know that, was cooking at a traditional, summer Thanksgiving dinner at my house in the mountains. And I asked Judy to come along. So that was our first date. Next summer, assuming I don't get in any more trouble for doing a TAIC show instead of celebrating even more tonight, on our first anniversary date, we'll have our 49th wedding anniversary and hopefully the 50th after that, assuming I don't get in too much trouble for not celebrating right now. But back to TAIC. This was Adam on test night. This was from the first broadcast, largely just to see whether we knew how Hangout software worked and how to get it broadcast on YouTube. It was followed the next weekend, June 8th, 2014, by Adam, Sergio, Josh, and Hytham doing some processing in PixInsight and Photoshop. But really, they spent most of the time trying to figure out how to mesh Hangouts and the YouTube software and the broadcasting of it. There were a lot more comments about, oh, I can see you, but I cannot hear you. And try zooming your screen. And hey, where's the cursor? Than there were about actually stretching the data in PixInsight. Remember, it was a first effort, long before COVID had made meeting software and YouTube rebroadcasting common. What has happened in the last 10 years? Well, the tech has changed. Simple Hangout software was killed off. We turned to Google Meets, which offered a few bits and pieces that we didn't used to have. More importantly, we turned to Wirecast software that allows the manager of the program to select what is being shown, resize the windows, and to change the outgoing messages, connect with YouTube, and manage the stream. Molly, Patrick, Terry, and Tim each have been trained in its use. For every session, one of them is in charge, Terry's in charge tonight, of the technical part of the broadcast, and another is backing up the lead in case something goes wrong. It was an expensive operation since the streaming software cost some $400 a pop, and we needed 4 of them. But it has made the sessions easier to run, more reliable, and gives us more flexibility. And of course, technology-wise, the COVID experience has made us all able to handle remote presenters, managers, and participants much more easily. Unfortunately, some of the more frustrating things about the technical aspects show through the years remain. We are frequently asked why we don't broadcast in 1080 or other higher resolution format, because it can be hard to read the details of some of the text like PixInsight formulas or things like that. And we can hear the presenters say, see how this little trick makes the image just a little sharper? But no, we cannot see how it makes it sharper. The resolution is just not there in the presentation. The big stumbling block is the Google Meets and YouTube combination runs at 720p. It won't accept any higher resolution. We cannot have a high-def TAIC with today's technology. The Wirecast software I just spoke of helps a lot in this regard. Whoever is in charge that night can grab a section of the screen that the presenter is presenting and zoom on it with the Wirecast software so that the presenter does not have to think about it. The text appears larger and more legible when it is zoomed in, but that's not the same thing as high def. And doing that magic puts a little bit of stress on whoever is running the show that night. Our website remained pretty much the same this year. You can go to the astroimagingchannel.org and find out our upcoming schedule and various other things about what is happening on the channel. One of the most important things is, of course, the database section. There's a link there to the database section. And you press this link and up pops the program database page of the website. And then you press the link to the spreadsheet and you'll get an almost complete database of all 506 videos that we've published over the years. We have Gallery to thank for keeping up with this effort. One thing you should note is that it is an actual spreadsheet. You can work with it online or download it to your computer and manipulate it as you see fit. You can get the data of the show, which is a clickable link. These dates here are clickable links. You get the list of presenters, the title of the show, and a brief description. So you can look up, you do a find on any of those aspects. It is, as a spreadsheet, searchable and sortable, so you can find past programs on the topics of your interest. And of course, there is our YouTube channel itself, which is all 506 programs listed. You'll see that they're sorted in 3 ways. One is by past live streams. Tonight is a live stream, for instance. These are the Sunday shows themselves. The second row includes the 15 to 20 minutes each, shorts, focusing on just one aspect of a small process or one small topic. Some of these are produced specially as shorts, and others are abridgments of our regular programs. And this tonight, right now, this 15 minutes, and particularly the next 2 with Molly talking and me talking about the various aspects of imaging, are also going to be shorts, and they'll wind up in that column. Finally, you can see on the bottom row here how Molly has organized playlists collected around certain common topics. The most valuable thing we do here is have a collection of tutorials through the years. It would not do the astroimaging community much good to know that such a resource exists as all these videos, but not to know how to find out what they're looking for in this treasure trove. Gallery's spreadsheet helps a lot. Before we leave the website, though, there's one more thing we need to at least touch on. This is the way you can get in touch with us to volunteer to be part of TAIC. It's the contact page. If you want to give a presentation or to tell us whatever you need to tell us, I'll get back to this in a minute. You'll see more about it. Over the past 10 years, we've had nearly 2 million views. That translates to about 434,000 hours of eyeballs watching our production. We've had eyeballs on the screen watching the Astroimaging channel for a total of 18,079 days. And here is the remarkable thing. This is something to note. If I had started watching the Astroimaging channel on the day that I first dated Judy, on June 23rd, 1975, I still would not have equaled the amount of time watching that everybody has watched TAIC, bringing you the best in imaging. I probably would not also be married to Judy at this time. So how do we stand as a whole versus the other YouTube channels? Well, once again, we are not number 1. As a matter of fact, we are behind as the 888,923rd best rated channel on YouTube. At least that is how Social Blade rates us this year. That's about 100,000 down from last year, which is not the way we wanted to move. However, I should point out that we are doing pretty good in YouTube world compared to all the millions of other YouTube channels. The 888,000th ranking puts us in the 99th percentile of all YouTube channels. For those of you who do not remember how they ranked you compared to other people and when you took the SAT in high school, being in the 99th percentile means that you are in the top 1%. So if we're in the 99th percentile, we must be doing something well enough. We have just crossed over 18,000 subscribers. This is about 2,800 more than last year's anniversary show. And this increase was more than the average increases we've had for the past few years, about 2,000 on average over the last few years. Reflective of the demographics of amateur astroimaging as a whole, the audience is nearly all male. As for presenters, 4 years ago, we had only 4 women presenters. 3 years ago, we doubled that to 8. In 2023, we had only Molly and only once. This year, we bounced back to 6. We need more of you to volunteer. We know you're out there. Come represent your growing influence. Talk to other women you know in imaging and bring them into our family. Last year, 55 plus categories were, I can't hardly read this over here. 55 plus category, this category down here, shrunk from, wait a minute, represented 49.6 of our audience, 49.6% of our audience, just below half. This year, it's a touch more than 60%. And our 35 to 55 cohort shrunk from 41 to 37%. Of course, last year's anniversary show, we commented that that was a slightly younger crowd than we had the years before. Perhaps we're reverting to the norm, but at any rate, we need to attract a younger audience still. Well, Mr. Cursor doesn't seem to get back. There he goes. Oink. 46% of our audience lives in the USA. And next comes the United Kingdom and Canada. And there are a total of 49 countries, listed in our YouTube analytics. As you can see, the show that was by far and away the most watched was the January 14th show by Kai Young about the unconventional uses of the ZWO Z-Star S50. It peaked in its January debut, but having kept a strong showing for the rest of the year and into 2024, the second most watched new show was one by Adam Block way back in June of last year. And the third most watched new show was one by Steve Siegler on September 24th about imaging the annular and solar eclipse that visited us this year. 2 other shows, Deep Sky Astrophotography with the Go-To Dobsonian by Steve Miller and All About Telescope Back Focus, a short by me, rounded out the all top 5 programs of the year. They were both from previous years, but continued to have viewers enough to break into the top 5 most popular for this year. It should be noted that the C-Star and the Back Focus events programs both did something that is relatively rare. What they both did is to break into the top 10 of all-time shows. This is unusual because most of the shows in the all-time top 10 are there because they have been around forever, and people have had plenty of time to watch them and watch them again. The other 8 of the top 10 shows were all in our collection since 2016 or earlier. This is the history in orange of the demonstration of Backyard EOS, the top watched show of all time. Note how it started up, and it has just been pretty good following along all this time. The blue indicates the Back Focus program. Let me see if I can find that on here. The blue indicates the Back Focus program, and it started 2 years ago and has been attracting eyeballs steadily since then. Then look at this tremendous green spike. All right, that's the show by Kai and on the C-Star. Lots of people watched its premiere, and I think that was probably our biggest Sunday night audience ever. And it's still getting many hits 6 months later. Okay, here we go, right out there. We do have some expenses, and we have to think about how to finance what we do. We're quite solvent and can pretty much do what we need to operate at our level. The corporation pays its way now. There's no more of this hitting each other up for some money when we need to do something. Our income has come from outright grants. That is, viewers simply write us a check or PayPal donation, no questions asked. I suppose I'm required to mention that you can go ahead and do that at the bottom of the comment section there. We also occasionally get a contribution from viewers who take advantage of the $ at the bottom of the comment section during the broadcast. Well, we have swag available in the form of t-shirts and sweatshirts and things like that. We don't seem to have a lot of people wearing our swag. We don't like ads in our shows any more than you guys like them. I get them now and then. I go, you nasty nasty commercials. But we do have expenses in our production software, our internet fees, and our Google subscriptions. So we kind of need to keep them in there. Most of our expenses are related to the software to stream the shows and other expenditures for Google, Weebly, and the internet connections. I remember the announcement that Adam made on Cloudy Nights 10 years ago about starting the Astro Imaging channel. I thought then it was kind of like an Our Gang comedy when Spanky would yell out, "Hey, let's put on a show." But Adam and the rest of the crew did it, and it grew through a lot of diligence. It was very informal. If we needed something paid for, somebody just paid for it. If we needed some technical advice, we Googled around and YouTubed or whatever we needed to do to get the technical advice. But when somebody had a life intrude and had to leave, well, we were at risk of losing the whole show. So a few years back, we got serious enough to become a corporation, and we increased the number of people within the core group. We went from Adam and a changing support crew to the bunch you see here: Gowie, Tim, Eric, Patrick, Terry, Molly, and me. We've had others in that core group. Rory, this year, for instance, had to take a leave when his job changed once again. But no matter what happens to the individual in this group, at this point, the Astro Imaging channel can persevere because it's not dependent on a single person. It is a corporation that can technically live forever. And while it sounds fine to say it's a corporation that can live forever, that is not exactly true if it's not supported by people. And we need fresh blood. Last year at the anniversary show, I told you I would no longer be taking the lead role in all of this. And the transition has worked out really quite well, I think. I hosted only one show this year, and everybody has worked harder to host, run the streaming software, get the presenters, and all these many hands have made it work lighter overall. But let's take a look over here in the chat room. See the chat room here? See all those names we've got there? Many of them are out there tonight. These are the people who show Sunday. Every Sunday they come out and help us and make comments. We sure could use your help to get your picture into this fancy group here, one of this beautiful group of people here. To get your picture into it, all you got to do is volunteer and put in some time and stuff like that. You don't have to have anything really special going on. I mean, hey, look at me. I'm not special. I mean, you don't have to be a really great astroimager or even smart or really you don't have to have any special technique except a willingness to work, a willingness to be pleasant, and just to hang in there. Although those technical aspects and being smart do have a little bit of help, they do help. The first thing we need are people with the energy and ideas that can help us keep moving forward. I like to think we are some pretty talented people down in this nice picture, but speaking for myself only, I know I'm not any more talented in the things TAIC needs than most of you out there. I have no idea what the tech crew has to do with getting the show from the presenter to the YouTube to the viewers. As for my astro imaging skills, I have not taken a decent image in months. I'll never have an APOD. Last week I was joking, and one of my fellow astroimagers in the Riverside Astronomical Society said that they were discussing taking away my astroimager's license. But I think I can help people to present on TAIC and keep these programs running. So I think I'm of value, and you are too. You've heard me ask 1,000 times, we need more presenters. That's the hardest part of having an astroimaging channel that must put on a show every dang week. The most common reasons people think they don't have anything to offer is that they don't know what to say in the presentation. They don't think they're good enough for the imaging. or they cannot think of a topic that has not been done before. You know, there are only so many atom blocks out there. Actually, there's really only one atom block, but just because you're not as good as one of the greats does not mean you don't have anything to offer the show and your fellow astroimagers. I've already told you that I'm not the best astroimager out there, but a presentation I have done is the 8th most watched video in our 10-year history out of the 507 now. As for thinking of a topic that has not been covered, don't worry about it. With 507 videos in the vault, there's not a whole lot of topics that have not yet been covered. Now, I'm not saying that you should volunteer if you do not think you can make a 45-minute presentation in PowerPoint or such software. But if you have made some presentations, if your buddies have liked it when you show them how to do things, if you have some reasonable skills, you can put together a meaningful presentation. Remember, every time you walk into a room, somebody in that room is smarter than you are, and somebody knows something you don't know. Don't let any of that get in the way. Just tell us what you got. If you have yourself together, you can be a presenter. The second thing we need is somebody who understands YouTube. Yeah, Patrick, Molly, Terry, and Tim know how to get the stream to the air. But there are all sorts of ways to spread information about the channel, all sorts of ways to work YouTube, and we simply have not had experience with. There has to be somebody out there who can help us use the tools in YouTube to work the analytics, the organization of the videos, and all that. If you have experience, get in touch with us and share it with us. Help us out on the technical aspects of YouTube. The final thing we need is more contacts, more presenters. You folks attend workshops. You have gurus in your club. You know who knows what he or she is talking about. You know people who can do this, and they put together some pretty good shows. If you could recruit them or give us a recommendation and some contact information, and we could recruit them, it would greatly help our efforts to expand the breadth and content of our shows. So go back to that contact page and tell us what you want to help over some of what you want to do to help share some of the responsibilities in putting on the Astro Imaging channel each week. So that is the 10-year review and the highlight of this year. Please join us every Sunday. We are here. Become part of the regulars. Get into this little team down here. I'll see you next June on our anniversary. Assuming, I'm not in too much trouble for missing this one with Judy. And I hope to see you lots of times between now and then. So thank you very much. Let me get out of here and get out of here and get out of here and go back to here. I think I'm going all the way back. Stop presenting. There we go.
Yeah, I feel like our subscriber base has been growing faster over the last 2 years, and that's awesome. Getting more people get to learn all kinds of cool stuff about astrophotography.
Cool. Hey, Molly.
Yeah.
What you got to say, girl?
My turn. All right, it's my turn. Let me share my screen here and start my PowerPoint. All right. Yeah, so as some of you guys know, I'm a little bit crazy, and not only do I run a telescope rig in my backyard every night that it's clear, I currently run 3 telescope rigs in my backyard every night it's clear, and still manage to sleep most of the time. And now that I live in Albuquerque, I get to do this even more nights a year. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how I do this and how you can get started in using at least one rig, and maybe you'll become crazy like me and want to do more than one, because there's so many things to take pictures of in space and so little time. First, I want to give a little bit of information about how on earth I got here. This all started back in 2015 when I was given a 8-inch Schmidt grain on the Celestron Next Star single fork arm mount, and pretty early on, I figured out I could attach a DSLR to the thing and I could see more stuff than I could see with my eye, like the color in the Lagoon Nebula here with my very poorly tracked stars. And then after I was posting some of those pictures, apparently one of my uncles was into astrophotography and I never knew about it. And he wanted to upgrade his rig. So he gave me his old rig, which is the C11 and Celestron CGE here. And that allowed me to track equatorially and to get slightly longer exposures, a couple more exposures, and get some images with some slightly better tracked stars. I had some problems with that mount, and I wound up using our club telescope instead out when I lived in Dayton, Ohio for quite a while, where I took some much better pictures and what I consider to be some of my first good astro photos, like this one that won an Astronomical League award back in 2017. But, it's funny. I started with these big giant telescopes and then started getting to smaller telescopes, which is usually the opposite of how most people do it. And I bought myself a Celestron AVX and picked up a Borg 76 ED from another member of the astronomy club and was having fun with that for a while. Took a somewhat nicer picture of M51 here. You also started using a monochrome camera. Then I was in California for school for a little while, and I finally had my first backyard because I lived in an apartment before that. So I was able to start setting up, instead of driving all the way to the observatory for the Dayton Club, I could set up in my backyard finally. And I also bought a Takahashi from my same uncle that year for a nice family discount. And that's when things really started getting awesome because with having a setup there every night, I could image any night it was clear, and not just when I could make it out to the observatory. And I started getting some much nicer images with that. But I started getting really tired of my mounts having all kinds of problems all the time and breaking and things like that. So I decided to finally just go whole hog and buy myself a Paramount Mighty, which has been awesome ever since at the Advanced Imaging conference back in 2019. But, I had two mounts and I had another telescope, so why not set up the other one and have it still run too? Because why not? And I made some upgrades to my 8-inch here with the electronic focuser, off-axis guider. I already had the filter wheel for a while, but went back to imaging on the 8-inch after having not done that for a while. And then I started taking more camping trips out with the gear, and I brought all those rigs with me because I got really good at setting them up in short order so I could bring them out on weekend camping trips and bring them back. This is up in the Tahoe National Forest. I also brought along my Skywatcher Star Adventurer because I had it, so why not? Dark skies really help with getting some really nice images, like the Iris Nebula here with this nice dark nebula. Then I moved back to Ohio, transferred schools, and had a much bigger backyard. And I got my two telescopes set back up, but I bought another new mount, an Ioptron 740, because the AVX was having problems, and but I still wanted a lightweight mount, so the 740 it was. And then, but the AVX, I was able to fix some of those problems, and I had a mount. It still worked. I had another telescope that I got from another member of the astronomy club in Dayton, and why not set up a third rig? This is all going great. And just getting some really nice images with this setup too, which is I got in much more into narrowband imaging, which is a necessity from the city. And then, it kind of kept multiplying. I was sent a Skywatcher CQ350 to review, and so I had an opportunity to set up another rig, and so I took advantage of that. And then I moved to Albuquerque for my new job, and I've only got 3 of the rigs set back up so far because I've been pretty busy. But we have a lot more clear nights here, which has been great for iterating. And that was true in California too. I had so many clear nights, which is why I was able to iterate and work out all the problems with all of the gear, because there's always one problem or another. I'm still having problems. It never really goes away. So for those interested, here's some of the specifics on the rigs that I'm currently running. So this is the primary rig with, I upgraded from the C8 to the Celestron 9¼ Edge HD. And I have to say the Edge HD optics are awesome. I have a 2600 MC Pro on there, so one-shot color camera on the Skywatcher mount. I got a really nice Astro focuser from Prima Lucha Lab. I run a couple Optilong light pollution and narrowband filters in there, plus a couple of interesting Antlia filters they sent me to review. I do use the off-axis guider on that, and that's been going really well. And actually recently put the reducer back on that telescope I don't know, I kind of go back and forth on whether I want to use the reducer or not. And each of these rigs now has its own computer to run it. So this one has a little Intel NUC that runs it with pretty modest specs, to be honest. You don't really need much to run these things. This is what I call secondary. This is Takahashi that I got a couple years ago. It's now, I just bought an Ioptron HAE 29 as an almost graduation present. And it's one of their new strain wave mounts, and that's been kind of fun to learn how to use. Optilong LRGB SHO filters on here. I picked up a used Eagle 3, which has been really fun from Prima Lucha to have a computer that is really dedicated for astronomy, and it's got power and switchable USB ports, and that's been really nice, a really nice addition to that. Plus, I got a solar telescope 2 years ago, something like that, a couple years ago. And then a couple years ago, I started doing variable star photometry for the American Association of Variable Star Observers. And I swapped out an 8-inch f4 newt for an 8-inch f5 newt because it had a longer back focus. And that allowed me to actually put a coma corrector into the train, which both telescopes sorely needed. I have a QSI 583 that was donated to me by a member of AAVSO. And I finally decided to stop trying to run that on the AVX and put it over on the Paramount where it belongs. And I've got its own little computer for that as well. So I'm just finally got my transformation coefficients measured so I can start submitting observations again. I've been paying particular attention to T Corona Borealis, which is that star that's going to go nova sometime this summer, keeping a close eye on it. And then soon I'm going to be rebuilding this rig. I'm going to take that RC that I also picked up from an astronomy friend. And that's probably going to go on the Ioptron 740. That's not currently being used since I got the HAE. But I'm probably going to need another computer to run it because I tried running multiple rigs on one computer, and USB devices were always getting kicked off, and I finally got tired of it. So one computer per rig is really helping me out here. And those NUCs, the Intel NUCs, they're $300-400, nothing crazy. And then I might eventually put together a 5th rig as well. I still have 2 functioning Celestron AVX mounts and one that I might be able to fix. And I've got this Astrotech doublet as well. And yeah, just, I don't know. I got enough stuff to put together another rig, although I don't have another cooled camera. So I'll have to mess around with that. And yes, I really do leave them up year round, including in Ohio. And that's all made possible by these Telegizmos 365 covers. This is a picture from day before yesterday when it poured rain like crazy here in Albuquerque. You can see how wet my backyard is. And I went to go check on how well the covers were doing, and everything was nice and dry underneath of them. So they're still doing very well. So if you want to get into having even just one rig in your backyard that you can run every night, I'm going to go through how to start with that and kind of tools for success. And because now I'm at a point where I use the Nina scheduler and I just turn on my sequence and hit go and go to bed. And it's great because I can get enough sleep to do my day job. So some tools for success, a good tracking mount. And it's going to might sound crazy, but honestly, having a high quality mount is better than having a high quality telescope. Spend money on the mount first, spend money on the telescope second. Like, you can get nice images from a cheap doublet as long as you have a mount that tracks well. And you could have a super fancy Takahashi, but if it's on a mount that doesn't track well, that doesn't guide well, no amount of Takahashi goodness of optics is going to help streaked stars. So yeah, mount first, telescope second. It's really helpful if it has home position and limit switches or sensors. That helps with safety during the night. Make sure that like the camera doesn't hit the tripod. that it will park, it can find home and stuff like that. Those are really helpful to have. And obviously being able to control it via USB on a computer. Electronic focuser is not a necessity if you just want to get started, but you're going to quickly find that you want one. For a lot of refractors, like my Takahashi in particular, the temperature changes adjust focus very quickly and many times a night. So I'm refocusing a lot during the night. On Schmidt Cassegrain's mirror flop, a little bit less of an issue on the Edge HD series, but was definitely an issue on some of my, like my C11, for example. On Newtonians, because of the cameras hanging so far down away from the tube, and the way that it's not exactly balanced, you can get flexure, and so you might want to need to refocus with that sometimes. And for any of them, if you're using more than one filter, you got to be able to, like, no two filters are truly parfocal, even if they're from the same brand. Being able to refocus per filter is great. Electronic filter wheel, if you need a filter wheel. Even on my one-shot color camera, I have a filter wheel because I use a light pollution filter and multi-narrowband filters. So in the same night, before the moon comes up, I'll do wideband. And then when the moon comes up, I'll switch to my narrowband targets. This Nina scheduler does this automatically. And that way I can do both and be able to take advantage of as many nighttime hours as possible without having to go make configuration changes every night. Dedicated computer, one of those little headless nooks or something like that is really all you need. Does not need to have good specs. As you saw, one of mine only has 8 gigs of RAM and an Intel i3 7th gen. Actually, no, it was i5. Still 7th gen now. And either use like a Wi-Fi antenna, or I have all my stuff is hardwired. I run an Ethernet cable into the house, and that goes into from my outside router to my inside router. But I have been able to do some stuff over Wi-Fi in the past. If you want to leave it out and not have to repolar line it every night, having a telescope cover like the Telegizmo 365 is great. And just lots and lots of practice. Moonlit and poor transparency nights are great times to work out bugs like guiding parameters. And I don't actually align my mounts. I just have plate solving, get them on target. So I don't spend time dealing with alignment models and stuff like that. But there's a lot of practice of like making sure everything in your sequence makes sense, double checking that the meridian flip happens when you expect it to, putting in some error checking in the Nina sequence so that it can recover over the course of the night and stuff like that. And it's like I mentioned, when I was out in California, I was able to iterate because I was able to work on it every night that it was clear, which was a lot of nights, and finally get to a steady state where, like, I still wake up in a panic occasionally in the middle of the night because I think I hear rain, or I think I hear the mount slewing weird or something like that. But yeah, I've never had any true disasters. I've had a couple of, have to go run and cover the scopes, but that's usually in the daytime, actually, not the nighttime. But yeah, I sleep pretty well these nights. Yeah. So I really take it one step at a time. If you try to get all of the devices at the same time and try to get them all to work, you're going to have a really hard time, and you're probably going to get really frustrated, and you're going to waste a lot of nights where you could be imaging. So, oops, that didn't work. Okay. These are supposed to go in sequential order. So first is to get familiar with your mount. So doing some visual observing with it, or using your camera, but punching in stuff in the hand controller, so that especially if you haven't used like an equatorial mount before, getting used to how it moves, understanding what a meridian flip is and stuff like that. Getting familiar with your camera. If you're starting with a DSLR, then take day and nighttime shots so you get familiar with the settings. What happens when you change ISO? What happens when you change exposure time? Just to get a sense of what that looks like. If you have an Astro cam, practicing with SharpCap, taking both long exposure and short exposure images in SharpCap is great for just getting instant feedback on what things look like and stuff like that. Then pair the mount and the camera together. And I do recommend adding auto guiding first, because then you're gonna be able to take those longer exposures. And while it can seem like a big hurdle, once you figure it out the first time, it actually tends to work pretty well after that. These next couple, not exactly a strict order, but a suggested order to consider, is adding a filter wheel, and then just like doing some manual focus runs, adding an electronic focuser, and then like you can kind of be doing some of these like like taking images live and sharp cap and stuff like that. But once you kind of get familiar with the hardware, then it's time to start looking at your sequencing software. And in my opinion, there's pretty much nothing that beats Nina right now. Yes, I've been using Nina for the last couple of years. I used to use Sequence Generator Pro, but Nina just blew it out of the water, so I quit using it. Adding the auto meridian flip can be a bit terrifying at first. I highly recommend practicing this during the day because you don't need stars to be able to at least like double check that it does the flip, even if you don't do the other steps of like focusing and stuff like that. Or in the early part of the evening, if you want to go through the whole procedure of focus, flip, focus, and stuff like that. Being able to remotely access your computer is really handy. And I think I have some notes on that here in a second on what ways to do that. Then you can start adding multiple targets to your sequence. And so it's slewing around the different targets over the course of the night. And then finally you can sleep. Then eventually, when you get comfortable with sequencing, you start looking at the target scheduler, which makes all the decisions for you on what targets you should run that night with the moon and with what time things are rising and stuff like that. So I don't have to go hand jam it every night. So some quick notes on power management. I got some of these large power enclosure boxes from Amazon that are rainproof and mostly bug proof. I just put a surge protector in there. I keep all the AC/DC bricks inside to keep them safe from water. I use some Wi-Fi enabled outlet switches. If you're going to use a USB hub, get one with external power. Otherwise, you will perennially have issues with your devices. Like, just make sure you have one that has some kind of USB or 5-volt plug-in. And you can also use boxes like the Pegasus for scope top power and USB to help reduce the number of cables that run down the mount. As far as cable management goes, it's really important to keep cables from snagging through the night. That's one of the safety things of being able to run all night. So I got this self-closing cable sheath that the way I hang it on the telescope in a particular way so that when it moves around, it kind of ends up moving away from the mount. And this you can practice during the day doing, like, flip it over one direction, go all the way south, and then do a meridian flip to the south on the other side. Do that a couple times, just make sure that nothing's going to get caught. Plus, it makes it much easier to assemble and disassemble the mount when all the cables are together. As far as remote access goes, I prefer using Windows RDP, a remote desktop. And now the computer you're connecting to needs to have Windows, like Windows 11, Windows 10, etc. Pro in order to use RDP. But whatever computer you're connecting from does not need to have Pro. In fact, you can connect to that Windows computer from a Mac, or I do it from my phone in my bed sometimes just to check that things are going well. There's a Microsoft Store app version, or there's old-fashioned Windows Remote Desktop service as well. And the nice thing with that is that it works without internet connection. So when I go to star parties, I just set up a local area network, and I can log in to all my computers from the star party with no internet. If you mail the image from home and you have internet, then Chrome Remote Desktop is free and easy to, and you don't need Windows Pro to use it. There's a couple others like No Machine and AnyDesk as well. Yeah, I think I'm going a little long on time. So I'm going to skip through how to actually build a Nina sequence, but I do want to talk a little bit about what Nina has in it. It is Windows only, but honestly, you probably don't want to leave your MacBook outside anyways, so you may as well get a little itty-bitty Windows computer. And then you can control it from your MacBook inside if you want. Has full equipment control over everything from cameras to domes. It'll control domes and all kinds of other stuff in between. The advanced sequencer lets you set the exact order of things you want to happen. So for instance, when I use Sequence Generator Pro, it would focus first and then so to the target. Well, it's like, okay, when I was in California, I didn't have a view of the North Celestial Pole where, like, I didn't have a view of north where the telescope is in a home position. So I had to run focus before I started the sequence every night. Here, I can have it slew, focus, and then do the centering where it uses plate solution to get on target. So that way I'm for sure in focus when I do plate solution, and I'm for sure on some stars when I go to do an autofocus. And you can check for conditions. You can, if you have safety monitoring devices, it can check for those conditions. You can build reusable templates, all kinds of stuff. It'll even skip over targets if they're too close to the moon. yeah, it has a target catalog that makes it easy to find targets or to at least get them in the sequence. A framing assistant, which is great for if you want to set up like a particular composition or if you want to do a mosaic. Flat wizard, which is really nice. It determines the exposure times for you. Yeah, I'm not going to have time to go through the example sequence, but sometime I'll do a show specifically on building a Nina sequence if we haven't done one too recently. I download all my data in the morning and I go blink through it at PixInsight while I'm eating breakfast. Let's see. Yeah, lots of other useful functions. Yeah, I'll skip over those. Yes, and the target scheduler, which is what I use exclusively now on all 3 of my rigs, so I don't have to go and check, okay, is this target too close to the moon tonight? Is this what time is this target setting? It'll do all the decisions for me, and so I just have to check every once in a while that I don't need to add any more targets because the season's changing and stuff like that, or it's not continuing on a target that I'm done with. But it makes it much easier. And thanks to Tom Palmer for building that. He's got a whole show on our show on the scheduler. So check that out if you're interested. Yeah, when in doubt, reboot. Only change one thing at a time to isolate a problem. Sometimes it's a power issue. Sometimes it's a USB issue. Sometimes it's a cable issue. USB is the worst. Disconnect, reconnect. And sometimes bad guiding is just due to seeing or transparency, not your mount. So unless you're getting consistently poor guiding, have some patience. But most of all, persist. Like there's nights where I've wanted to throw the rig at the wall, but there's a lot of good nights where I go to bed and I image and get up in the morning and download my images, and they're all great. So persist, and you'll be able to start getting lots and lots of subframes quickly, so you can start processing them. And yeah, it's a lot of hard work, but totally worth it. And I get a lot of sleep these days. And that's what I got.
Hey, Molly,
Thanks,
Molly. There was just one question. I didn't interrupt you. You mentioned that you had a filter wheel on a color camera. Is that like a 5 or a 7, and you just use a couple positions on it?
So I have a 5 and actually use all 5 positions. I have a luminance filter when I go to star parties or dark sky sites. I have a light pollution filter, the L Pro. I have a dual narrowband filter, the L Ultimate. I have an Antlia tri-band RGB Ultra, which is kind of a cool, like wideband, narrowband, like it's kind of somewhere between wideband and narrowband. It's been kind of fun to play with. They sent it to me as a review article. And then they also sent me an S2 H beta filter, which you can combine with an H alpha oxygen 3 filter and create Hubble palette images with a one-shot color camera by using those 2 filters. So yes, I use all 5 slots.
Okay. And I do believe we had the one question. And you're right. We need a longer show on the scheduler itself. So we'll be getting into that later. Now, if I'm doing this right, I should be able to hit this button right here. Don't read the text yet because it's, oops. Slide 2. I'm on slide 2 already. Back one. There we go. We're going into the third presentation here, and I can tell you I was really nervous about this because I was asked to do a short TAIC tutorial for, somebody relative newcomer to astroimaging. I was kind of shivering and trembling. I kept vacillating about what topic to talk about. Nina, autofocus, scope selection. I was in such a state of excitement and confusion about what to do. I was highly nervous, excited. As deadline approached, I was all dithery. And then it came to me. Yeah, that's it. Dithering. Yeah, that's the ticket. So let's stop playing around and get down to the actual brass tacks. And by the way, I wasn't really nervous. I knew I'd be among friends tonight. Check out this highly enlarged image of a star field. Notice how the background is modeled. Okay, all over this background. Laser pointer. How this background is all modeled. It is made of millions of dots, pixels. If things were perfect, all of these background dots would be the same shade of dark gray. there would be none of these single white dots that you see all over the place, these little white dots. They're called hot pixels. This line, which you probably could see, this one right through here, all right, would not exist. You would not see alternating dark and bright lines that you can here, kind of like corduroy pants. The signal from the background pixels would be of uniform darkness and clean. The Astro imager would not have to worry about noise. But alas, things are not perfect. Slight variations in the way the electrons record photons and slight variations in the way the photons arrive make for slight differences in the shades of gray. You can get rid of most of these variations by averaging them out over time. But using mathematics on many individual shots, you can clean things up. Now, as we flip through this stack of images, notice how the white dots stay in the same position, while the larger white areas, the stars, move around. That is because the stack is dithered. Note how much of this discussion will be illustrated with hot pixels, since they show up the best. But dithering does not really focus on just hot or cold pixels. Hot pixels report higher values than they really should. Cold report lower. As a matter of fact, by the time you get to stacking an image, the hot cold pixels may already have been cleaned out by bias and dark applications, and a little by the flats or by a cosmetic correction. That does not mean that there is not a residual flaw where the hot pixel had been removed. What happens in bias and darks and cosmetic correction is an attempt to correct the bias and correct the bad information of a hot or cold pixel based on neighboring pixels or some other statistical trick. The math is pretty good, but not perfect. So some slightly off information can remain in that pixel. That information will be further smoothed by the math of integration and integrating and averaging out the differences between the subframes, but it could very well still be there. For illustration purposes, though, notice how in this clip, the hot pixels are staying in the same place while the stars are flopping around. The hot pixels are staying in the same place, or were staying in the same place, because that is where they are on the sensor. Meanwhile, since the imaging sensor was dithered, the stars were shifting around on the sensor between each image. You will also notice on the one slide that I bumped into the telescope. And when I bumped into the telescope, I slightly moved it during the exposure. So it is a bit of misshapen stars. Dithering can help with these, but really, this image would probably have been rejected before we even took it into processing. Although this looks pretty much the same as a couple of slides earlier, it is different. I registered the stars so that they are all aligned. Notice how now the stars are staying put while the little white blobs are moving around. Because I moved the pointing of the telescope between shots, that is, I dithered, the distance between the hot pixel out here, and the center of the star has changed. In order to get the star in one shot and another to line up with the star in another sub, I have to move the star. As I move the star, all of the pixels, including the hot, cold, and otherwise extreme, go along with it. Since there is a distance difference between the star and those pixels after dithering, the new hot pixel position of the registered sub no longer matches the hot pixel position of the first. In each successive stub, I've changed that distance between the hot pixel and the center of the star. So when I lined up all the stars, the bad pixels were spread around. It should be noted again that this is not just the hot pixels we are worried about. They are just illustrative of the things that are moving around. I also changed the distance of the star to any other pixel on the sensor. In other words, the bright star pixels will always be bright, but the dim background that happens to be a little darker here than it should be, a little brighter there, will now be mixed in randomly with one that is perhaps a little brighter than it should have been. Whatever it is, the randomness smooths out the background. Let's look at how that works. This is what it looks like to register the stars. Place one frame on top of another and move it around until the stars align. So there's one frame, there's the other. The stars are aligned or not, stars align. And you can see when the stars align, the hot pixels and all the other pixels no longer align. They have moved. Let's look at the values we get from the 9 subframes. We're going to record the pixel value in 8 columns along a given row. Notice that the data from one exposure to the next, as we go down the column of different exposures, remain pretty much the same, but they are not identical necessarily. That is because imperfections happen. Here is a 9 where everything else is a 5. Here's a 0. Where's the 0? There's the 0 when oh, here it is. Here's a 0 when everything else there is a 5. Now, these exceptions are weirdos, and we do not like weirdos in this hobby. No, that was a joke. Weirdos are welcome in this hobby. What we do not allow are numbers outside the 2 standard deviations from the mean, or outside a percentage of the average, or the highest and lowest number, depending on what our rejection algorithm says. But weirdos is simpler to say. Let's get rid of the weirdos and average things out again. And you have, what you get for averages looks a lot smoother than the first time around. By removing the numbers in red above and then recomputing the averages, we get different numbers. You have a general background of about 5 and then a rise in the middle that may be a small star, and then it goes back down to 5. Let's take a look at what happens if we don't dither, though. That was dithered shots. 9 exposures without dithering. Not too much difference up on top here, okay? Except it's one column over here. Uh-oh, that column had a bad pixel in it, and so every time it reported a 0. Since the telescope always pointed to the same spot, that particular pixel always reported a 0, a dead pixel. Hot pixels would regularly report a 10, or whatever the highest possible number is, although hot pixels are anything that repeatedly report more than they should. And as you can see, it doesn't average out nearly as nicely along here as being a smooth star. So looking at the results, we see that with no dither, we find a black pixel in column F for all of our pictures, and we get a value of 4.2 or even 4.8 after the rejection of the weirdos. Let's look at how much more sensible the numbers are for the, I think I said that right, how much sensible they are for the dithered overall. Even without rejection, the dithered set gives us some kind of useful data. Use rejection and look how much smoother this whole transition is. Okay, so that is why we dither. Before we go on, let's talk as an aside for a moment about some ideas that would raise their head in this kind of discussion now and again. One is about auto dithering. I've actually heard it called that. Okay, the point of dithering is to move the telescope around so that the bad pixels and other noise is randomly distributed, and thus less noticeable compared to registered details like stars. Yeah, that's the point. Well, the lazy little newbie says, my mount has quirks, and it kind of moves around a little bit all by itself anyway. So everything is kind of randomly distributed, and that's my dithering. Well, newbie, I've got 2 levels of response to that, if I'm going to say anything at all. As the noise moves around, so does every other detail in the picture, giving you sloppy stars and other messes. And if your mount is that poopy, it's probably not randomly poopy. There's a directional drift, perhaps a periodic error. If your mount is moving over time because of bad tracking from the motor or polar alignment, then it is dragging a collection of photons into lines and not what they should be. Thus, you're going to have what's called walking noise. A little hard to see in this picture here. It's over here. I can see it very clearly, but by the time I stole it from Cloudy Nights and are running it through Google Meets and YouTube at 720, it's not easy to see. But over here, I manipulated the picture to show you this. See the streaks? That's walking noise. In this case, the Astro Imager was smart enough to get very short exposures. And then when the galaxy and stars were registered, they looked pretty good without trailing. But the same registration pulled all the other trails of photons into long lines called walking noise. Ain't no such thing as auto dithering. Another miscellaneous thought is about direct dithering. Some mounts are so well built and maintained, perhaps with special location encoders, and so well aligned that they can pretty well take 5 minutes and perhaps longer exposures without any guiding. And some portable rigs are so small that they don't even have room for a guider. But you still want the noise suppression of dithering. Nina SGP and other session manager programs offer dithering without guiding. You need no camera, off-axis guider, or guide scope. You already have the connection between the mount and the computer and between the exposures of the main camera. The session program manager will send commands to dither. This is often called direct dithering. You're not guiding, you're just dithering between shots. How you do it varies from program to program, and it is sometimes not easy to find. But basically, between shots, the session manager program sends a signal to the mount to move so many pixels in one direction or another. And when the mount reports it's done so, or after an appropriate time, the session starts the main imaging camera again. This differs from the more common dithering where when told to dither, the guide program changes the sensor coordinates of the guide star's lock point to a different location, and then continues to guide until the star is at the lock point. And then it sends a message and then the session manager knows that it's where it belongs. The next exposure on the main camera is in a slightly different target of the sky. Another preliminary thought is that if you asked how much you want to dither, if you are asked, figure out what the units are. Your arc seconds per pixels change depending on your current configuration, including the telescope focal length and the pixel size. A 150 millimeter long guide scope working with the guide camera with pixels that see 2 arc seconds each will move 20 arc seconds if you tell it to move 10 pixels. If you put that same camera in an off-axis guider, it will move substantially fewer arc seconds because there are fewer arc seconds of sky in each target pixel. And that 20-second move of 10 guide pixels will still be 20 arc seconds of movement in the imaging camera because you're actually moving the mount. But there may be some completely different number of imaging camera pixels in that move. So keep all that straight. If your buddy says he moves 4 pixels in each dither, that means nothing unless you know how much that translates into motion across the sky in your guiding setup and your imaging rig, and your imaging camera. And please note that the kind of noise that dithering minimizes can generally be thought of as small pattern noise. That is the same pixel or row or column of pixels reporting incorrect data. That's not what's happening here. If the bad data takes up a lot of area in the chip, like this light leak or amp glow perhaps, dithering will not help you much. You just can't move far enough away between exposures and get it properly dithered. So much for the miscellany. How do most of us dither? Well, you probably already have the equipment. You generally need a guider. There's a guide camera with using a separate guide scope or an on-axis guider or an off-axis guider. With direct dithering, you can skip this and rely on the accuracy of the mount. The equipment needs to be connected to a computer, so you need cables to the computer and, of course, a connection from the computer to the mount. And, of course, the computer. And that computer, you need a session manager. This starts the imaging camera capturing and in between captures the commands of the guide program. Maxim and some other session managers will have their own guide program internally. Many session manager programs, however, call an auxiliary program to do the actual dithering. For most of us, the session manager is Nina or SGP, although there are many others, and both ask PhD to do the guiding. As an ASI Air also incorporates PhD to do the dithering, or at least a subset of PhD too. But even if you use Maxim or another program to guide, concepts are pretty much the same. The computer you are using is connected to the mount in various ways depending on the mount, but at any rate, the same cables and controls that allow you to the mount to slew or center on a target can accept commands to do the dithering positions and things like that. So you already have all that. You can see that the basic questions related to setting up dithering are the same in various session manager programs. Here are two popular programs, Nina on top, SGP on the bottom. I've been using the bottom for years, and I've occasionally played with Nina, but not enough to get to know it. I know there are many Nina users out there who can correct or add to what I'm about to say on this program. So chip in over on the comments if you need to say something. Both need to be told how much you want to move each time you dither. In Nina, you tell the number and dither pixels. Below in SGP, you tell it the range you want to dither. From small to extreme, you got 5 choices. You want to choose the value on either of these so that your imaging camera, not the guide camera, will shift about 10 seconds or 10 pixels overall. And remember, your imaging camera and guide camera arc seconds per pixel will probably be different. Whatever you choose, PHT2 then generates a random number between 0 and that number in Nina or whatever level you choose at SGP, and then sends the mount that far away. But let's talk for a moment about how much you want to move during a dither. The answer is about 10 pixels of the imaging camera. As you can see, to line up one image with the other in this photo on the left, I have to move the second subframe up and to the right a little bit. You can see how the overlap of the star is fine, but the edges of the frame are not overlapped. See them here? See how this sticks out a little bit and this sticks out? Come on, stick out like you're supposed to. There we go. Excuse me. And the opposite edge, the top, is not covered by that edge of the frame. So instead of 9 frames, covering that edge of the bottom. So instead of 9 frames going into the final pick, I only have 8 in the non-overlapped areas. And if extremed enough, the overlap can get pretty big. The more you dither, the more ugly edge you get. We hate other ugly edges. The bigger the ugly edge would be if you dither more. And if we hate ugly edges, how do you think we feel about these big, big ugly edges? See how you get not the same representation across? On the other hand, if we do not move enough, there is a chance that you are pulling the bad pixels from one shot very close or even on to those of another. Even with the magic of stacking and pixel correction, you might yet see an anomaly. I would imagine that you can tell Nina how often to dither. I do not use Nina regularly, and that's one of those things you can correct me on. Those of you who take 5-minute long exposures will probably want to dither every frame. Those who take lots and lots of 15-second exposures cannot afford the overhead time of dithering each frame. So you may want to dither every 5th or 10th frame. When most guide programs dither, what happens is that the chosen target stars remain the same, but the guide program is told to move to a certain lock point, set number of pixels. The guiding program continues to guide until the target star matches the new lock point. And then it reports to the session manager. The sessions manager says, let's take the next picture. If your mount is well behaved, corrects quickly compared to the timer it takes to get the sub-exposure on the main imager, go ahead and dither every frame. On the other hand, if your mount is poopy and it takes a while to settle, and particularly if you are using very short exposures on the main camera, then try dithering only once every 5 frames or so. Both NINA and SGP has a control to determine how long the guider must settle in the new position before starting the next exposure. You don't want this to be too tight, or you may never get the guider to settle just because of normal variations in seeing. It should never be tighter or close to the seeing value, but if too large when you have a few cycles of the guider taking more time than you need between the shots. So play this by ear. Come on, cursor, get where you belong. I would imagine you can tell. Oh, there we go. Each program has a control to determine how long the guider must settle in the new position before starting the next exposure. You do not want this to be too tight, or you may never get this guider to settle because of the normal variations in seeing. I think I just said that. But if too large, you may have a few cycles of the guider taking more time than you need between shots. So play this one by ear. I don't see it in NINA, but SGP allows you to check a box and wait for several seconds before starting the main camera exposure. This helps if you have a sloppy mount with backlash. It means once you start the next camera image, there will be very little, if any, shifting to get to the dither lock point. And before we move on, note that both these programs have additional setup requirements for the guider. But we've talked about the main settings for the guiding. NINA has additional dither settings, but these are handled differently in PhD itself. And while you're setting things up, be sure to look into the brain under PhD too. Under the global session settings, you will find a place to tell PhD whether you want to move your scope randomly or in a spiral direction. Random is best because it is, random. With an averaged random is the best way to get rid of noise. But it takes decent mounts to respond. Spiral is said to be better if your mount suffers a little from sloppiness, and it would take longer to settle down after each movement. It's faster because it does not reverse direction and declination as much. You can also tell PhD2 and NINA whether to move only in RA. This helps if your mount has some real issues with backlash. However, be well that it could lead to a fixed pattern noise like that walking noise. And of course, some mounts, like sky guiders, can only control in RA. Finally, you will notice a scale setting in PhD. These are for those who have SGP or other session managers which use small to extremely large qualitative type of descriptions for the amount of dither operation that will move the scope. This number should normally be left at 1.0, but can be set at different numbers to multiply the distances specified by the session manager. Remember, you are after a dither movement of about 10 imaging camera pixels. There's some experimentation in all of this to get something that moves at just the right amount to get a bad pixel in one shot away from the bad pixels in another shot without causing unnecessarily delays in starting that next shot. Dithering is not hard to do, and it works well to fight noise. Some people advocate instead of using cosmetic correction, cloning, or other techniques to control, they advocate those to control aberrant pixels. Some people with very clean CMOS cameras just seem to think that there are not enough bad pixels to worry about, and CMOS does not have column defects. Or some, those who believe in auto dithering, say that the natural deviation and random movement of the scope during a night of imaging means the bad pixels don't line up during stacking anyway. Okay, be that as it may, as I hope you have enough of the basics from this presentation to implement dithering into your works. You know the way and a bit of the how. Remember, though, that you have to try out some of this in your own backyard, even on a moony night, to work out the details that you'll be happy with. So if you're not doing it yet, quit dithering and start dithering. Thank you, folks. That's it. See if I can get out of here. I'm back. Stop
Awesome.
sharing.
I'm sure this video will get as many views as your back focus one.
I hope so. I want to help you. I want to help you. I really do want to help you. I know it's difficult. Quit dithering around.
Don't be greedy. You got one on the top 10. Alex. I don't see any questions. Did I miss anything?
I prompted people to ask questions, but apparently your presentation was thorough enough and answered everybody's questions because nobody asked any.
Cool.
But
Yeah, as a matter of fact, nothing's happened since Molly finished talking. You guys are pulling my leggy.
I think you mentioned that the settle time versus settling to a point, settling to an error point. I think that's how I run my dithering.
Basically, like allowing it, giving it a set 5 seconds or something to settle versus waiting until the guiding has
waiting until it returns to.
Yeah, most
position.
of them have an option where you, it's got to be to a certain level, less than 1.5 pixels for a certain amount of time. And I usually set that for about twice as long as my typical guide exposure. Because that means it's got 3 responses in a row where it was within the allowed
and
limit.
you briefly mentioned there's a lot of overhead. You're taking short exposures, and if you're dithering, you got 20-30% of your time just trying to recover from that.
Yeah, and I'm using an AP mount, and it does what it's supposed to do. I also use other mounts, and they don't necessarily do what they're supposed to do, and they take longer to hit that lock point. And you just have to. And another thing is that if you don't hit that lock point at the very beginning, and your first 2 pictures in the main camera, by the time your first picture ends, even if it's a 15-second picture, you've been through 3 or 4 other guiding cycles, and it's stable by then. You know what I mean? Or it's not going to get stable.
And you might, like with short exposures, be able to dither less often in terms of frames, but it ends up being about the same in terms of time. Like if you dither once every minute, for example, which let's say that's once every 6 frames, or if you dither once every 10 frames or something, because you have many more frames that you're stacking, you probably get as good of a statistical effect.
And seeing has a big effect on how quickly that recovers. Because if you have crummy season, I was going to say crappy, but I guess we shouldn't say crappy on here, which I said twice.
Well, as you saw in our demographics, we don't have any kids watching this show, so.
Okay. So the worse the seeing, the longer the recovery, because you just have a lot of bounciness in that guide curve.
Well, I think I mentioned, don't make it less than you're seeing. Don't, you got to, your specification for your minimum acceptable has to be bigger than your, or your maximum acceptable has to be bigger than you're seeing.
But that changes night to night, especially when you're not watching it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can have 3 arc seconds seeing, you can have 1 arc second seeing.
Eric, I got to tell you something. Dithering, it's just like, it's like you said with guiding. Look, it just guides. Just get out there and guide. Get out there and dither. It's just set it up and make it a little, give it a little.
I have never changed my dithering setup in the past.
Amen.
2 years. In fact, I can't remember even setting it up. One setup.
For those who are wondering where we're getting the topics for the shorts, what we did was we looked through, I don't know, a couple of 100 posts in Cloudy Nights and just noted what they were about. What were people in the beginner's corner of Cloudy Nights asking? And we kind of grouped them under certain categories and stuff like that. And we're trying to take them through time, trying to figure out what people actually need to know.
Chris asks, how do you determine you're seeing? Is that a PhD? Is that a PhD somewhere? Well, it depends on where you locate. Sometimes you'll have sensors set up, look at the sky until you're seeing. If not, how do you do that?
It isn't in PhD, because I went looking for that, and I went looking for if PhD had any suggestions after the what's it called, the guiding assistant, whether they had any recommendations for dithering, and apparently they don't. One of the ways I could tell is because I always image from the same place essentially. But you know what? If you're that close to it, you don't really need it. You can tell that if it's not settling, unless you've got an amazingly crappy, stupid mount, it's you've got bad seeing. Another way to tell if you got bad seeing is to look up and look at the stars and see if they're shimmering.
Another way to see whether you had a bad seeing night is if you are not watching your telescope and you have 6 hours of possible imaging and you come back and you have 10 images.
Yeah.
What went on? Probably seeing was so bad it just never really settled.
What about dithering and drizzling? I have never drizzled in my life. In astrophotography, I've drizzled, yes.
Drizzling is processing.
Yeah, but drizzling is processing, and I don't know if you need to dither in order to process. Who knows that? Eric, you want to talk to that?
Drizzling, I think it's a topic. It's a short topic we can probably cover in another session. I'm happy to do that. It depends on whether you're over or under sampled and how big your pixels are. Again, it's another kind of discussion. But yeah, we can cover that.
It would be good to actually have, I mean, I think we could potentially do a whole show on drizzling, both with like the concept of it and how to do it, because it can be just a couple extra steps you have to do in PixInsight and how to take advantage of it afterwards. I think there's a lot of confusion over when you should drizzle, when you should not drizzle. How, like, if you have a one-shot color camera versus monochrome, with your focal length and your seeing and stuff like that. I think we could do a whole show on that.
Yeah, I have a 4-meter scope and small pixels. And I'm never going to drizzle because it has no advantage of it. Yeah. But when you do drizzle and it's worthwhile, then you round out those stars and it can produce a very nice effect. Then again, it doesn't really work well on hydrogen alpha images.
Interesting.
But that's kind of a practical matter.
Tarek wants to know, what is the sensor problem? I don't know.
I think he's referring to a comment earlier above about dithering dithering and drizzle addressing sensor, like with how it's dithering addressing the sensor problems and not the drizzling. But I think there was a bit of confusion there. So
well, yeah, and he talks about drizzling for planetary. That's lucky imaging. That's a different beast.
Yeah, different reason. Some related concepts there, but totally different processing chain.
Yep.
You note Mike Covington's fixed pattern noise, or where there's something defective with the sensor itself, so that it actually gets it's reporting too high or too low for some reason consistently. And we talk about dithering. What is binning? Oh, okay. Oh, Tarek, that's a whole different show. What is about binning?
If you use a CMOS camera, don't worry about it. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Well, no, I wouldn't necessarily agree. Again, I bin because my particular setup with small pixels and a long focal length, bin 1, there's no advantage unless I have 0.5 arc second seeing, which I don't think we've ever had.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to save disk space, then sure. But I prefer to have the data and then downsample it later. But we've had this talk before.
Yeah. And you're right, there are some opinions about that
tonight, aren't I? I mean, this part of it. We've gone, it's amazing how 3 15-minute programs turn on 90 minutes. But that's what happens when you're having fun, guys.
You're worrying about not having enough shorts to fill the time. And what
happens. Don't need to worry. I can talk forever. Don't worry.
Yes, Melly,
we'll talk later. Anyway, that's it for us from tonight. And next week, the Ceravolos will be here. And they've got this magical, beautiful telescope, and we'll show it to you. Okay? Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks for coming in. Happy 10th
anniversary.
By the way,